Blessings, good evening. This is Tuesday night, so there's a few questions to be answered. In the end, one answers the questions, the Dhamma questions, through the practice. You end up answering them yourself through your own practice and realizations that come along the way, but especially in the beginning of practice, it can be a shortcut towards some understanding and gaining confidence in the practice. So there is a valid place, I think, for discussion, questions, answers, and so on. The first question tonight: what does uddhacca kukucca mean? And how does it arise? So these terms, Pali terms, uddhacca kukucca, refer to one of the 5 hindrances that we talk about often in regards to the development of samadhi, states of stillness, samma samadhi, right mindfulness, right samadhi. Uddhacca kukucca is restlessness of mind, mental agitation, anxiety. So it's a hindrance to the mind settling down, calming down into samadhi. So restlessness, anxiety, obviously what we call mental defilements as well. Many of these terms, qualities of mind that the Buddha referred to, he'd use different categories or labels. So the 5 hindrances: sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and anxiety, and skeptical doubt. They're 5 hindrances, but they're also considered defilements, mental defilements that defile the mind. So just however you're describing these more negative traits of mind, whether they're described as a hindrance to samadhi or kilesa, mental defilement. Main cause for restlessness, agitation, anxiety, well, there's a number of causes that will lead them to arise. Number 1, a lack of mindfulness. So if you train in mindfulness, right mindfulness, then that will help to restrain the restlessness and agitation of mind, to abandon it. But you also can use a lot of wisdom, and you'll notice that a lot of the restless anxiety of mind is coming from either regret, mental discomfort over past actions, particularly unskillful ones. So like when you break sila, or you harm yourself or others through speech, action, and then when you remember those actions, past actions, you feel uncomfortable. They agitate the mind. They move you. Mentally they move you. So sometimes you can't settle down because you've said or done something that is now bothering you, and you remember it, and literally your mind is moved by the memory. Or it could be more towards the future, and one perhaps is deciding to do something, and there's a little bit of doubt, uncertainty and anxiety about, this course of action, this choice, this decision I'm making, will it lead to something unskillful, not very good happening? You haven't done anything yet. It's just the projection into the future, what might happen. That's a great cause for anxiety as well. Say, like, if you're going to go to hospital for an operation, you haven't had the operation yet, you already have the anxiety about what's coming up. So nervousness, anxiety. So it's not always related just to sila, whether you keep sila or not, but it's also just related to issues that seem important, that may bring with them risk, strong consequences, that will agitate your mind. Only the Arahant has completely abandoned uttacca, restlessness of mind. Even the Anagami has a little bit of restlessness. That's a non-returner, somebody who's developed deep samadhi to the level of fourth jhana, and they have no more greed or anger associated with the physical body. So they're very advanced. They still have a little bit of restlessness in their mind because they're not yet arahant. So at the very least they have this sense of, what more do I need to practice? Where do I still need to investigate the truth, to see the impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, lack of self in phenomena? So even the Anagami has a little bit of restlessness. And the unenlightened person for sure will have a restlessness coming up. And you'll see it when you try meditating, establishing mindfulness on an object such as the breath. Your mind keeps moving, thinking about stuff. A lot of it is very meaningless, just meaningless chatter, restlessness. Some of it is more powerful emotions, but that endless chatter of the mind, this is restlessness. So how does it arise? Well, when mindfulness slips away, then restlessness and agitation and anxiety can come in to replace that. So keep up your level of mindfulness and restlessness may not bother you very much, but it does because our mindfulness is not yet strong and continuous. So we also have other techniques to help deal with restlessness, anxiety. One is to just reflect on your sila, your practice of morality, sila, precepts, and if you notice somewhere where you have broken your sila, broken your precepts, you kind of patch up the hole. You determine to, from here on, to keep the precept well. So you're re-establishing mindfulness, you're patching up the hole that emerged during the course of your practice perhaps. Another one is contemplate impermanence. Even restless states of restlessness, agitation are impermanent. They don't last. And the more you see those states of mind passing away, the easier it will be to let them go in the future when they reoccur, if they reoccur. So it's not sure, it's not certain. There may be something really bothering you and you're just thinking and thinking and thinking about that thing, but eventually it will pass, your mood will change. So bring up the reflection on uncertainty. Ajahn Chah said if you're getting really fed up, just hold your breath while you're meditating. And the mind is very restless, just stop breathing. What happens when you stop breathing? You stop thinking about all the other stuff and you just start thinking, when am I going to breathe again? If you're not going to let yourself breathe, you're going to die. So immediately all other affairs and matters take second place and they're not important anymore because you're not sure whether you're going to be able to breathe again or not. And similarly, you could reflect on death, marananusati. When you reflect on death, again it cuts through restless agitation of mind. So practitioners often do things that just bring up heightened states of mindfulness, wakefulness to help deal with restlessness. So one of them is like you go meditate in a place that brings up some fear, say a lonely mountain top or a graveyard or a place where there are some wild animals around. You go to those places, you don't have so much restlessness of mind because fear makes you very mindful, very careful, brings your mind right to the present moment. So there's different ways we deal with restlessness, anxiety. Number one, establish mindfulness. Number two, see it as impermanent, as not self. And little by little, you're chipping away at it, undermining it, so it can't take over your mind so easily and for so long. Another question. I had a vision of a monk walking towards me in my meditation. What should I do? Well, that's a very auspicious, good vision to have in your meditation. Samana Nancha Dasanang, as the Buddha said, it's in the Mangala Sutta, the blessing, teaching on what is a blessing, a true blessing. Seeing a monk, seeing a samana, somebody in robes with a shaven head is a blessing. So even if it's a vision in your meditation, or some people have dreams where they see monks, it's generally a good thing. The monk may be coming to teach you or inspire you, or you're just seeing the sign of the samana, the sign of the renunciant. And Buddhist monks, they wear these robes. These are, like we call them, the banners of the arahant. So whether the monk is an arahant or not, they're wearing the uniform of the arahant. So to see a Buddhist monk reminds you of the spiritual path, reminds you of all the good qualities of the path, the wisdom, the compassion, the peace, remind you of the arahants, remind you of the Buddha. So it's considered a good fortune, auspicious, to see a monk. But you don't necessarily have to do anything in particular other than just witness that vision. And in the end, all visions, they arise, they pass away, they're impermanent. So even if you really like the vision you see, you can't cling on to it for very long, it'll just pass away. But perhaps it's a sign that at that time your mind is in a wholesome state, a good state. Your mindfulness has come up, maybe you have faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Your mind is in a bright state, maybe the hindrances are fading out as you're meditating. So you have these kind of auspicious visions, even if it's only for a few seconds, a few moments. It's like a signpost on the way saying, oh, your meditation is going well today. Doesn't mean to say if you don't see a vision of a monk, your meditation is no good. It's just one sign on that occasion that you're meditating. So enjoy it, and it may be a cause for some joy, rapture to arise. There may be one exception to this in the case when perhaps you've done something really foolish or harmful, and the monk is coming to teach you, point out your fault, point out your mental defilement to you, or scold you, or tell you off, which does happen as well. Probably less common, but the monk can come along in a vision and just, give you a stern face. The monks who lived with Lumpur Cha, one of the most common visions they had was at 3 a.m. just before the wake-up bell, when they were maybe indulging in sleep or feeling lazy, or even saying, I'm not going to get up for my morning meditation today. Suddenly they have a vision of Lumpur Cha right there. And the vision of the teacher brings a certain state of alertness. For some monks, even a state of panic. Because when you see the teacher, it's like, oh, gotta get up. Helps you to cut through some defilements. Not always, but that's one benefit of seeing the teacher in your meditation. Brings up a wholesome fear, a fear coming from wisdom, where maybe you know where you're indulging in a defilement, and seeing the teacher just helps you to let go at that moment. Could be the same with, say, the monk is thinking of a woman, having having sexual desire arise, lust arises. Could be a thought of anger, ill will, hatred towards another person. And then a vision of the monk or the teacher reminds you, oh, that's not the path. The path is not one of hatred, it's not one of lust, it's one of mindfulness, the middle way. So sometimes the monk is coming to help you be more mindful and cut through defilement. Sometimes the monk is just coming to signify that your mind is peaceful and in a good state. Just depends. But you don't have to attach to our vision. You just know it as impermanent, not self. But maybe it's a good sign or some helpful sign along the way. Another question. How do you deal with boredom in meditation? It's just another mood. It's just another thought. The thought, I am bored. Try to be mindful of that. You get more used to the spaces in the mind, the silence of the mind, the quietness of the mind, and then the thought, I am bored, will be highlighted all the more as just another thought. It's nothing very significant, doesn't have a lot of importance or power to it. It's just a thought, mainly coming because previously we've been attached to stimulation and excitement. We're always looking for something to do, something to say, something to look at, taste, smell, touch, through our senses. We love sense contact because it stimulates, excites, interesting, and the world is going around because of it. We're always having to seek out fresh stimulation to entertain ourselves, interest ourselves in any aspect of life. We say it, don't we? Oh, I want to my job is getting boring. I want a new job to stimulate me or challenge me. Or we want to go on holiday to a new place because we want to be stimulated and see new things, do new things. So we take on new sports, new hobbies, meet new people because it's stimulating. It's endless, the obsession with seeking fresh stimulation, new things, and the world is always producing new products and experiences for us to have. We don't like things that we get used to. They lose their stimulation, they become boring. So that applies to meditation as well. When you begin meditating, it's interesting at first, so you have a few experiences where you're peaceful and it's very you're learning how to meditate, you're learning to turn your attention inwards. So you may have a few what we'd call good meditations. And then things settle down after that and becomes what you call very mundane, boring kind of meditation. And then people start saying, oh, my meditation is boring, I don't see anything. So they start looking for something to stimulate themselves. One of the ways we value or judge our meditation is maybe what we want something that we can tell our friends about. Or our friends are making it hard for us as well because they're saying, what did you experience in your meditation? What did you see? What did you feel? What happened to your mind in your meditation? So you feel obliged to manufacture something. I saw the lights, I saw the vision, I had great joy and peace. I heard this strange sound, I experienced stillness, silence. Other people are trying to get us to say things, we are wanting to say things. Whether it's true or not is another question. It may just be a fabrication of the mind. But actually, meditation is a lot of repetition, going back to very simple meditation objects like the breath, which are very neutral, not that stimulating, not very exciting. And a lot of the time we're just getting to know our mind, what's coming up, calming the mind, and then reflecting on the three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. Emptiness. Emptiness, just the name sounds boring, doesn't it? Emptiness. And we often use the word to describe a state where we feel lost or life seems meaningless. We say, my life seems empty. Actually, once a bit of wisdom and understanding arises, emptiness becomes something very good. Seeing the emptiness in form, the emptiness in feeling, the emptiness in thoughts is wisdom. And it liberates you from attachment, liberates you from constantly seeking more stimulation, always trying to excite yourself, have new experiences. You just see experiences as they are, as things that arise, pass away. Thoughts are just thoughts. Feelings are just feelings. Even very blissful, amazing experiences, they still arise and pass away. So mindfulness and insight is a great leveler of experience. The more you meditate, the less you attach to the highs and the less you attach to the lows. Because if you're always seeking stimulation, excitement, then that's when you're not getting it, then you tend to go towards boredom and disappointment. But as you practice mindfulness, everything has equal value, as it were. The exciting, the unexciting, the eventful, the uneventful, the pleasure, the pain, they all become objects of mind, become what we call Dhamma, phenomena. So boredom is just another object of mind. You don't have to identify with it and latch onto it and suffer with it. You just know, there is a feeling or a thought of boredom coming up. And the more you practice, the more you understand why it's coming up. It's just coming up from previous constant seeking of interest and excitement. Another thing is that even the mundane can become interesting as you meditate because you're more mindful. It all becomes an object for insight. So just feelings, observing the process of Dhamma, say how kilesas arise, how greed arises, how aversion arises, understanding the process and then understanding the process of letting go of attachment to greed, to anger. That all becomes stimulating, but in a wholesome way, the stimulation of the Dhamma. As the Buddha said, there's nothing that tastes as good as Dhamma. That's something they should introduce to Master Chef or something. What is the best taste in the world? The best taste in the world is the taste of Dhamma. So through practice, your mind changes and you're no longer just seeking stimulation through your senses, excitement, and then getting bored when you can't get new stuff, new stimulating experiences. You're seeing everything more as Dhamma, so your mind withdraws a bit, but then is at peace with the way things are, whether it's stimulating or boring, it doesn't matter so much, it's all Dhamma. It's a kind of different way of looking at stuff. Another question. Luang Por, is it useful to read about the lives of enlightened monks and nuns when our modern life is so different? Well, yeah, I'd say it is worth it, whether you're listening to or reading about the biographies of monks, nuns in the time of the Buddha, enlightened disciples of the Buddha, and there's many sources for this, the lives of the enlightened disciples. I think the more you practice, the more you find it inspiring, helpful, and you often hear how they practiced, get insights into what they did, how they lived, the challenges they faced, and then how they overcame those challenges. It can all be very helpful. And you also get an idea that in the time of the Buddha they faced difficulties, and in the modern era we face difficulties in the practice. Human beings haven't changed that much, but hearing and understanding how people overcome those challenges, what Dhamma, what ways of practice they employ to overcome the difficulties and the attachments that they have. I think most people find that quite stimulating, whether you're just reflecting in your meditation, what we call Sanghanusati, recollecting the qualities that noble ones have, and those qualities we need to develop as we cultivate the path, or just hearing the stories of inspiring teachings from enlightened ones or practices they've done. And maybe another thing to notice is because human beings haven't changed that much, even though the world has changed a bit, there's more people, more technology, all kinds of social development and different things in the world than, say, in the time of the Buddha. In the modern world, people are still bound up with mental defilements, greed, anger, delusion, coming from ignorance. And the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the way out of suffering, the way to abandon defilement, hasn't changed. It still applies today as it did 2,500 years ago. And you can also read about enlightened monks and nuns in this day and age. Ajahn Chah being one. We now have his biography in many languages. And there's other teachers. If you can learn a bit of Thai, there's even more available. There's plenty of wise enlightened monks and nuns in Thailand and other countries, but particularly Thailand is what my experience is of, say, particularly the meditation masters of Thailand. They're not all translated, their lives and teachings are not all translated into English, but there are many of them. Many of them not that famous or well known, but in the circle of monks they are. You get a lot of good ideas how to practice, how to deal with the ordinary nitty-gritty of dealing with the human mind, how to deal with sensual desire, lust, ill will, hatred, laziness, apathy, doubt, worry and anxiety, as we've been talking about earlier. All these experiences that people have to deal with haven't changed, and so people are dealing with them now. They dealt with them 2,500 years ago. And some people go through amazing kind of revolutionary changes in their practice. Like the nun Patachara went through extreme suffering and trauma, losing all her family, her parents, her husband, her children, all in very short space of time, and completely lost it because of the trauma of her experience, and she became just totally wild. She was wandering around the countryside without any clothes on, completely lost in her own suffering and trauma. But then coming across the Buddha and meeting with the compassion of the Buddha and then the wisdom of the Buddha, and the Buddha gave her teachings that made sense to her, brought her mind back to a state of normality, out of her trauma and mental suffering. So she eventually became a nun, and she eventually became enlightened. So she went from extreme trauma and mental illness to extreme wisdom and compassion, enlightenment. You can't really get any kind of greater transformation than that. And then there's stories, like Venerable Yasa, who was brought up in a very wealthy, powerful family, leaving it all behind, seeing through it, seeing the delusion of attachment to sort of wealth, power, fame and fortune and sensuality, going out into the forest and becoming enlightened. People who got completely lost through their wrong views and having a wrong teacher, as it were, like Angulimala, so being a murderer but then coming back to reality and establishing the path and becoming enlightened as well. So the stories of some of those monks and nuns are quite amazing. And you realize that whatever you're facing, whatever problems, obstacles you're facing, other people have overcome them. So if they can, you can. Or in the modern era, monks and nuns who have had to face great hardship, illness, injury, danger. The forest tradition of Thailand, in the old days they were in the forest having to deal with a lot of disease, malaria, dysentery, typhoid, cholera, all kinds of horrible diseases, and with very little medical help. Poor quality food, very little support. Sometimes people who are aggressive, unfriendly, and then of course all the wild animals, snakes, tigers, bears that threatened monks. They've been through many obstacles, and then of course the more internal obstacles of just dealing with loneliness, fear, worry, boredom, pain and discomfort, all the normal kinds of unpleasant mental states human beings have to deal with, confusion, but coming through them. So hearing about, say, Ajahn Chah, our teacher, how he dealt with his various obstacles and came through them, and then other teachers who devoted their lives to the practice, hearing their stories can be very helpful, whether it's just hearing a burst, just a short passage from somebody's life, or hearing a few words from their teachings. Best of all is actually meet teachers. If you've got the chance, you actually physically go and meet with teachers who have a good reputation as being a meditation master perhaps, and you get a teaching from them, see how they live, be in their presence for a while. That would be the best of all. But if you don't have that opportunity, well, at least you can read about them, hear about them. I might say second best or second hand, but better than nothing. And some of those teachers in the modern era, they've practiced and lived in very not ideal situations, and practiced in those not ideal situations, and proven that you can still practice even, say, in a city, say a city temple. There are some monks who have learned to develop deep states of jhana and samadhi in city temples. They've learned to keep the Vinaya despite all the temptations and all the hustle and bustle of the city. They've managed to keep their mind focused on their practice of developing sila, samadhi, panya, even living in the city. There are those monks. Jiao Kun No is held up by many teachers, including Ajahn Chah, for what's called the arahant in the city. So even though the monastery he lived in, what tapes are in, was in the city, he practiced and developed sila, samadhi, panya to the highest level. We believe he was an arahant living in the middle of Bangkok. Or I spent time when I was a young monk living with Ajahn Piak on the edge of Bangkok, but still surrounded by houses and factories and near the old airport with jumbo jets going over every few minutes. I remember the first day I was in his monastery, I said, "How do you meditate here with a jumbo jet going by every few minutes?" He says, "Jumbo jets? I got no problem with them. I just put mindfulness on my object and forget about the jumbo jets. And he can do that. Very good samadhi and very deep insight into the Four Noble Truths. So there are examples of people in the modern age as well, living and practicing. You can hear their stories, visit them, and this will also help you in your practice. So, definitely to be encouraged, read about teachers, hear about them, and visit them if you can. Another question. Dear Luang Por, can you help to explain where does trauma, depression, anxiety come from, and how to recognize and deal with it? Practice meditation on a regular basis, I would say. Practice meditation regularly, and even mild depression, trauma will come up, even very deep, profound trauma may come up. And you'll start to learn how it's affecting your mind, where it's coming from and how it affects you, and then how to deal with it. So probably what you'd call trauma, depression, anxiety means suffering, doesn't it? Mental stress and suffering of different types. Negative thinking. As you meditate, you're aiming to develop more mindfulness and then insight directed back to your own body, feelings, thoughts, perceptions, sense consciousness, your own khandhas. And you become more and more aware of the process, the causal process, how trauma comes up in your experience. So you're meditating, you may have feelings of tension or pain associated with past incidents that come up as a feeling first and then trigger memories and thought formations, moods, trains of thought. As you become more aware of all of that by practicing mindfulness, well, maybe you can have enough mindfulness to be aware of the painful feeling arises associated with a certain memory, but rather than letting the mind run on into creating and proliferating more suffering out of it, it just hold that painful feeling with mindfulness in place and observe it as just painful feeling. And you know where it's coming from, past actions and experiences in the past trigger this feeling, and then the thoughts and memories and images associated with it. But now you're developing mindfulness in meditation, maybe you can interrupt the old habits where trauma comes up. There's the pain, the emotion, the thinking, all one kind of mass of suffering. Now you're starting to separate things out. And particularly developing mindfulness and also the quality of metta and karuna, loving kindness and compassion, which will help to bring up very wholesome states of mind to help cushion the impact of past trauma when it arises. And it's something you need to keep practicing and developing. Obviously, trauma from the past, maybe this life or occasionally even past lives, comes up. You can't fix the past because it's happened. But you can be mindful in the present as it's arising and know, this is trauma, negativity, depression based on certain incidents you perhaps remember. Occasionally you don't even remember them, but you're just experiencing the feeling. But often there'll be a memory associated with it, and you have to treat that memory with mindfulness, insights, impermanence, not self. It's to be seen as impermanent, not self. And the more you establish mindfulness and reflect in this way, the less power it has over your mind, the more you can cope with it, and little by little through practice it will start to subside, and the metta and the karuna can come up and replace it more and more and nourish your mind with the more wholesome thoughts and reflections. Well, this process will be speeded up and improved through mindfulness practice and regular meditation, and then keeping precepts, associating with people who practice the Dhamma will help. Putting goodwill and generosity and kindness into practice in daily life will also help. So doing things that counter your tendency towards indulging the trauma, the negativity, the depression. Do things like helping people. You go out and volunteer, help people, put the qualities of kindness and compassion into practice in daily life, and this will have a very good effect, I think. How can we help people suffering with these problems? Well, one, sort yourself out first. Difficult to help other people, isn't it? If you're a mess, you're suffering a lot. So the Buddha encouraged us to start with ourselves, come back to ourselves, sort ourselves out more so that we can then maybe offer something back and support others. And what you're learning about yourself, well, that knowledge you may be able, later on you'll be able to give support to others by telling them what you've done and what you've understood from your practice. But if you haven't sorted yourself out, well, you'll probably make a mess of trying to sort other people out, and they can drag you down, burn you out, and things can get worse and worse. So sometimes we have to really look after ourselves first, get ourselves to a position where we're stronger, more at peace, more calm within ourselves, more steady. Then we'll be able to help others, just like a doctor has to be fit and healthy before he can treat others. If the doctor's sick, he's not going to be able to treat others. If we're still caught up in our suffering so much, it's really affecting our thinking, our outlook, our attitude. Well, it's going to be difficult to help others. So we have to sort ourselves out first. And little by little, we can maybe give something back. Like you can give maybe material help to others first. But psychological help, wisdom, compassion, maybe at first you're going to be limited in what you can offer. But through practice, maybe over time, you may be able to offer more. But just basic material help, maybe you can. You can help feed people. You can help do favors and run errands for people. You can drive a car for another person. You may be suffering as well yourself, but you're doing something good for others, and that lifts you up a bit. Then later, maybe you can do more in terms of giving advice and support to others. So try and get the process right. Work on yourself first, and then move out to helping others. Don't take on too much too quickly. And this applies whether you're in the Sangha or a layperson. It doesn't really vary. Like monks often, they go out too quickly to start teaching the world, and they end up going back into the world. They disrobe. Lay people go out into the world to help the world, very idealistic, and they maybe if they're still suffering a lot themselves, they have their own issues, then they get burnt out, disappointed perhaps. So know your limits as you're helping others. So maybe I'll leave it there tonight, just giving you a few pointers, and we can talk again next time.